People were ever asking me, does he really run about with 2 guns strapped to his hips? And he was a man like that. Like, you know, I mean, I was able to say yes, certainly. I wouldn't lie about it because he did definitely think it was Wyatt Earp or something like that.
This man, James Griffiths, went berserk on July the 15th in Glasgow. He shot 13 people, killing 1. Later that day, he himself was shot dead by police. Tonight, World in Action examines the life and death of James Griffiths, the gunman buried in an unmarked pauper's grave. He was 34 years old when he died and had spent 17 out of the last 25 years of his life in orphanages, approved schools, borstalls and prisons. During the programme, we reconstruct with actors the events that led to his death on July the 15th. At 10:50 that morning, police came to Griffiths' flat to question him about a murder. He started shooting at the police and then indiscriminately at passers-by. We've tried to find out what it was that led to Griffiths' last demented act and why no one was able to prevent it.
Well, really, we got on great. He was a very, very nice man. Nothing can really describe him. You know, he was that nice, well-mannered, considerate, on everything. I don't know. It was that different, really, from anybody else. He was gentle. He wasn't bad-tempered. If we had an argument, I was in the wrong, he would say he was sorry.
We heard what we thought was a car backfiring, and as I went over to the window, there was a man lying behind a green Cortina. My husband said, "That sounds terrible, it's rifle fire, it's completely ridiculous, it's a car."
James Griffiths was born, one of 7 children, in this house in Rochdale in 1935. His mother, who has since left the area, describes how the family had to struggle.
Mr. Griffiths had an accident when Jim was born, and he was off work 12 months, and there wasn't a lot of money. I mean, it all needs pulling up, doesn't it, when you've a family? You've got to clothe them and feed them.
Because of her husband's accident, Mrs. Griffiths had to go out to work, and James, already showing signs of being a problem child, was often locked out and left to play in the streets.
Well, he needed a lot of attention. He liked to be seen, and he must do something to attract attention to him. Once, when he was little, I had to draw attention to himself because he was jealous of the baby, and he took my watch and put it on a stone and just smashed it to pieces.
11:15 a.m., July, Glasgow. By the time police reinforcements had cordoned off the area, Griffiths had shot and wounded 7 people. Griffiths was first in trouble in 1944. Aged 9, he was accused of stealing at school.
There had several things been missing from school, but there never any proof that Jim had taken them, but he was accused. I did ask one of the teachers at school, and she said they thought the best thing to do was go to the juvenile court and see if they could do anything with him.
At Rochdale Juvenile Court, the chairman was hard on Mrs. Griffiths. He commented that a sum of £7 4 shillings was going into the household weekly without the mother's earnings, and it was felt that she was losing more than she was gaining by not being at home to look after them. James was placed under the supervision of a welfare officer and sent to a child guidance clinic for disturbed children.
He was taken to a psychiatrist while he was at the child guidance clinic. I don't know who he was, but that psychiatrist came out and said he was nothing only a born thief. Nobody'll ever make him any different. What I've seen and heard this afternoon, he says he'll never be any different as long as he lives. He's a born thief. It was just affection he was short of, and I should give him more. And she said, "I think you better take Jim on a holiday." And I said, "Well, I can't afford to go on holiday with all the children." She said, "I don't mean the other children." She said, "I just mean Jim."
When he was 10, his mother became ill. The other children in the family were sent to relatives, but James, who was becoming more difficult, was sent to an orphanage near Leeds for a year.
Well, that was when I was having Raymond, the youngest boy. I mean, he got a little out of hand because I was in bed. And it was suggested he should go until I was better and able to knock about again. And he went for a period. It was about 12 months.
The orphanage affected him deeply. In his adult years, he would invent bizarre and untrue stories to account for this part of his life.
He told me his father was a colonel and they had a big house. His father went away on a business trip and his mother had an affair with another man, and the result of it was Jim. His father was very annoyed about this, and he brought Jim up as an unwanted child. He used to beat him with a stick. And when they were having meals, Jim would have his meals with the servants in the kitchen. He did tell me he had brothers and sisters, but he couldn't get in contact with them. And then he told me his mother and father died, and he was an orphan. And he lived in an orphanage, which he didn't like at all.
Dr. Gideon Waddis, a psychiatrist, comments on the evidence of Griffith's mental state at this time.
Well, he certainly seemed to think that he lacked affection, and there are some facts which would seem to bear this out. In the first place, shortly after he was born, his father had an accident, and his mother had to go out to work for 12 months or so, which must have meant that he did not have as much attention as he needed at that age. Later on, because he was different in appearance from the rest of the family, being dark where they were fair, or he was fair where they were dark, he began to feel that he was inferior. And later on still, when he was sent to an orphanage, he felt cut off and rejected, and he must have lacked affection at that time, because when his parents went to visit him, he hardly ever spoke to them, but was very sad and very lonely.
11:45 a.m. Glasgow. After shooting at the police for over an hour, Griffiths escaped with a rifle over a roof into the street behind his flat. In 1949, when he was 14, Griffiths was in trouble again for stealing a watch from a shop window. He was sent to an approved school at Newton-le-Willows in Lancashire. This film was made at the school 2 years before he was admitted.
If you throw your weight about and try to show how tough you are, things won't be very nice. But if you behave yourself and stick to the rules, then you'll find it isn't a prison as you're thinking, but rather a pleasant sort of school. Have you got that?
Sir.
Good. Now, how much money have you?
2 and 9.
Hand it over.
He'd be with you all afternoon, and the only conversation you had was when you spoke, he'd answer you. Never told you anything.
We've walked through Warrington and I bet he hasn't spoke half a dozen words.
No.
I think the only time that he'd mentioned anything like that was when we went to see him. When he was at Newton-le-Willows, one of the masters come out and I said, "Who's that there?" "Oh," he says, "he's a pig." He says, he doesn't half belt you.
Griffiths spent 2 years at the approved school until he was 17. Back in Rochdale, he was soon in trouble, charged with illegal gaming in a public place.
He used to go into the parks and watch the ragmen play cards, you see, and he always said when he grew up he'd be ragmen because they always seemed to have money.
Griffiths was found guilty of illegal gaming. For this offence, he spent the next 3 years in Hollesley Bay Borstal in Suffolk. A friend who'd been gambling in the park with him committed suicide after being sentenced. When Griffiths was released in 1955, he joined the Royal Army Ordnance Corps. On leave in 1957, he stole a car from this house in Rochdale, but was caught almost immediately and given a 12-month prison sentence. Preston Prison gave Griffiths his first experience of prison life. Here, he met Vincent Burke.
James Griffiths was a prisoner at the same time as me. We had adjoining cells for most of the time. He was a very good-looking lad. He had fine physique, very well made, powerful, and attractive, especially to women. He told a lot of lies because he told me that he had 9 or 10 GCEs, but 4 or 5 of them at A levels. It turned out that he hadn't at all. He told a lot of lies, and he told me he was in the Red Devils, and I didn't believe him at first, but when he was released from Preston Prison, he had a Red Devils uniform on with the sergeant's stripes on. But he was actually in the Royal Army Ordnance Corps. My brother only met him for 10 minutes. And he, afterwards he said, you know, he asked who we were. I told him. And he said, well, I've seen a lot of mental people who are mentally ill through being a mental nurse, and he said he gives me the impression that he's psychopath, you know, has this psychopathic outlook, this psychopathic character.
I think he lied basically because he had to keep on assuring himself that he was an important person. Most of his lies were those which tended to prove to himself and try to prove to other people that he was a hard, tough nut.
Glasgow, 12:15 p.m. Griffiths arrived in the Postle Park area of the city in his stolen car.
He must have changed altogether from the last time I saw him in Preston jail. The only thing is psychiatric treatment. If you can recognise a person who's going to turn out like that.
Still carrying a rifle, he ran into a pub, drank some brandy, and shot and killed William Hughes, a newspaper seller. In 1959, Griffiths moved to Blackpool. Now 22, he'd spent 8 of his last 12 years in custody. An associate remembers him at the time.
Crime to him was adventure. He liked to feel his nerves getting excited, and he liked villainy, he just liked the kicks.
Did he carry guns when you knew him?
Oh yes, mostly on jobs for Dutch courage, self-prestige, to frighten people, and when there's a gun poked in your face, a lot of people will give you money rather than have a go.
Until then, Griffiths had been content with petty crime. But in 1963, with 3 other men from Rochdale, he raided a boarding house in Blackpool that had £70,000 in a safe.
And then we tossed up to who would go in. Jimmy and another chap won the toss. Me and Dan waited outside. They made a right hash up of it. They went in and tripped up the step, or one of them did, the other chap. We'd planned to go in with empty guns, as frighteners. Jimmy finished up dabbing a fella by mistake. I don't think any of us knew that Jimmy had the knife in with him. Later he tried to make up by putting a cold compress on one chap's hand, bandaging his hand round it. And the other chap was crying for his heart pills, and he just tried to make amends with the fellas. He didn't want to leave them in a bad state.
I mean, it did look so amateur, and in fact it was. I mean, as my mate says, it would have been, you know, had it been better organised and everything, we'd probably have got away with it. As it were, it was so cocked up, in fact, that that was it, with no hope of getting away with it.
Well, the offences that he committed were all of the same type, largely from motor cars, shop breakings, house breakings, and they were just run-of-the-mill jobs.
Inspector Jack Hilton arrested Griffiths.
He had a mania for guns. We traced, he had 2 in his possession when we arrested him in Baker. We traced a further one into his possession, and he had a liking for guns.
So he really was a potentially dangerous criminal?
He was potentially dangerous, yes. And even at that time, I came to the conclusion that if he was pushed into a tight corner, he would resort to using firearms. If Griffiths had made his mind up to use that gun in Glasgow, I don't see how he could have been stopped. I wasn't in the least bit surprised.
Springburn Road, Glasgow. Griffiths began shooting indiscriminately at children in a playground, hitting this child. By now he'd been on the run for an hour and a half and had shot 11 people. In 1963, Griffiths got 5 years for the Blackpool raid. Now he was the hardened criminal he'd always boasted of becoming. Stanley Walwork was sentenced with him to Walton Jail, Liverpool.
I was a first-timer in Walton. probably comparatively easy for me, but on the other side it's reputed to be one of the toughest in the north of England. Some person had got some blades in for him, and they were planted in the bathhouse, and the waters got the tip off and he was put on the A list, which means he was an escape risk.
In 1964, he was moved to Parkhurst top security prison on the Isle of Wight.
He went to some of the hardest prisons in the country, from what I've heard, Hull and Parkhurst, places like that, where men there are hardened criminals and sent there for that reason. He'd be mixing with that type of person, likely to be influenced by them.
I should say that Griffiths had to sort of live up to the fellas he was cellmates with, you know. I think he had to talk big.
Griffiths was now 30 years old and had spent 13 of the last 20 years of his life in custody. In December 1965, he managed to escape from an outside working party. Wally Gow, who lives in Scunthorpe, sheltered Griffiths for 4 months while he was on the run.
Well, he headed for London, and through somebody inside, he got to know somebody inside who had sort of relations with the Crays, the Cray twins, and he went round to their place and he said, "Joe or Big Jim sent me," or something like that, you know, and of course they seen him off, but Griffiths was able to tell people that he had something for them, like, you know, that he was going after the Crays. He had to sort of sort them out, you know, and all diabolical, of course, you know, but and then that story grew. It grew worse. Like, he'd swap shots with him, and he had a mark on his leg, and he said this was swapping shots with him. And then the next thing I heard from another source about this Cray shooting, he'd a Sten gun. He was using a Sten gun and spraying the street with bullets, you know. That's the sort of bloke he was Jim, you know. He really exaggerated it.
Could you tell when he was lying?
Oh yeah, well, he's like a paranoid. As soon as he got started going, you get him talking, and off he'd go and really exaggerate, you know. He was in an anti-tank gun then and things like that. He tried a few of the big houses, you know, but he never seemed to get very much.
What kind of stuff was he after?
He was always after gold, jewellery, you know. And I don't think he knew the value or anything like that, you know. Well, then it didn't seem like it anyway. If he was in front of you, you just wouldn't have known he was a villain, because he spoke ever so proper. Perfect gentleman. Looked a perfect gentleman, always dressed nice and neat. And always ready and willing to pay first, you know. Always had a few bob in his pocket. Well, all the pillaging and plundering he'd done, he used to all put it in his garage, you see. And he had about 6 or 7 garages in Scunthorpe, and as many cars. He used to go out with my sister-in-law. He courted her and they got engaged to her. I never ever said to her he was on the run, and she didn't know anything about him. She thought the world of him, like, you know.
Well, if ever he was out, he would always open the doors for you, you know, so you could pass through and pull chairs out for you to sit down first. He would go out of his way to help you always. If you wanted to go somewhere and he wasn't going to go, you know, he was going somewhere else, he'd go out of his way to take you.
He went to do a scrapyard once, and he was going to surprise the owner of the scrapyard. It was winter time, and he was waiting in there, and he'd another block with him. They were waiting on either side of the gates, you see, waiting in his block coming with his bit of money, or else they were going to tie him up, make him open the safe up. Anyway, they was there about half an hour and the doors open. And he had a big lump of wood in his hand, 4x4 it was, lump of wood in his hand. And when this particular person came in, he battered him over the head with it 2 or 3 times, and there was such a squeal, you know. And he jumped on this particular figure on the ground, and here it was a young kid it was. He was about 9 or 11 years of age. And the little kid was screaming. He said, "I've only come for my bike, mister," you know. And he says, "How much money have you got?" And he said, "I don't know." He said, I think it's 1 and something. And he looked in his pocket. He had 1 and 9 in his pocket. He says, "Give us it."
Griffiths was now showing alarmingly abnormal tendencies. After 4 months of freedom, he was caught, found guilty of robbery and sent to Gartree Prison, Leicester for 4 years. Gartree, a high-security compound with 350 men, has no resident psychiatrist. It has to depend on help from outside.
When I was in prison, I was in Gartree with him. He definitely had a split personality. And there was one particular job that he was talking about. It was a tie-up job. And he said that because the bloke wouldn't turn over the money, like, tell where the money was hidden in the house, that he began to chop his fingers off one at a time. And actually this wasn't true. I actually know this case, who actually was in on this particular case, but Griffiths was using this as one of his jobs, you see. And they had the television people come there, a television crew. And it was, I forget what it called that, From Out of Harm's Way, that was it.
BBC programme?
It was, yeah. And they had Griffiths on that. They interviewed him for a long time because he was doing a total of 9 years. He was getting near the end of his time and they had him on television.
The words you're about to hear were spoken by James Griffiths on a BBC religious programme in October 1968, 2 months before he was released, 9 months before the shootings. The programme was heard by an estimated 7 million people.
I couldn't settle down now if they let me out today and said, all right, you don't have to finish the rest of your sentence as long as you'll go straight. I just couldn't do it. I'll take a chance on it now, on the big one. It's always just around the corner. I don't go out with the intention of committing violence, but if in the course it means either I get caught and put in prison, or I whack somebody over the head and they die, that's just their hard luck. But let's face it, violence is here. It's in everybody in some shape or form. But I don't want to do it. But if I have to do it, I will do it. And once committed onto a thing, that's it. You go all the way with it. It's no good turning back, because you get just as much for starting as you will for finishing. It's a very precarious lie to say, right, I'm never going to work again. I'm going to get some money when I get out of here. Fair enough. But this time I know I'm taking my life into my hands, literally. When I get out of here, I shall either get the money and live very well in South America for the rest of my life, or get buried.
He was released 2 months later.
I blame the prison authorities for allowing a bloke like that out. But when a man says that in front of millions of viewers, psychiatrists and everybody should have been rushed in to get a hold of that man.
It wouldn't be unfair to say that there were pointers. In a television interview a few months before, he had said what he was going to do, and he did do these things. The prison medical officers just simply aren't thick enough on the ground to devote the time that is required to the depth study of a case like this. Their contacts, by their very nature, have to be far too brief.
I knew if Griffiths was cornered, I knew he'd ever go. He owed this to himself because he sort of committed himself. After saying this on television, there was a lot of the cons that I go at him, saying, you're talking a load of rubbish there, you know. But he used to maintain, well, you'll see then.
12:30 and the police close in on Griffiths.
But I think really this was to keep his bit of mouth up, like, you know. He used to say it often enough. When I go, I'm going to take everybody with me that I hate or everybody around about me, but I won't go on my own, you know.
Driving a stolen lorry, he turns off the main road, only to find himself in K Street, a dead end.
Here's a man who has boasted of things that he has done and of things that he was going to do, most of which we know were not true. This was based upon a fantasy of himself as a big criminal, and now suddenly all these things were happening to him in reality. This must have produced in him what must have felt like being in a nightmare. Running like a man in a dream, shooting guns off indiscriminately, not caring whom he hits, running through the streets, climbing in and out of lorries and cars, climbing over roofs, not in full possession of his faculties.
It's a very precarious lie to say, right, I'm never going to work again. I'm going to get some money when I get out of here. Fair enough. But this time, I know I'm taking my life into my hands, literally. When I get out of here, I shall either get the money and live very well in South America for the rest of my life, or get buried.
A psychiatrist defined Griffiths for us as a psychopath, a man compelled without choice to act out his impulses. This mental illness is difficult to uncover without careful psychiatric examination. We don't know how carefully Griffiths was examined. The Home Office understandably can't discuss individual cases. But we do know that for every 700 inmates, there's only one prison medical officer with a psychiatric qualification. James Griffiths graduated from being a difficult child to a criminally insane adult. With 17 of his last 25 years spent in custody, crime was his only standard and possibly the only way he had left of expressing his insanity.